So this is a very special episode. You know that?
Why is that?
I know that.
You know that?
I know that.
Yeah. It's episode 311. As you all know, very special, a very special number to me. And it's also almost going to release on 311. I wonder if we should put this out on Tuesday instead of Thursday. What do you think? Should we do that?
Brainstorm. Take me away from the norm.
Mm-hmm.
I got to tell you something.
Mm-hmm.
This phenomenon.
Devon, we've been wanting to ask you for a while, and we think you've known you well enough at this point and long enough at this point. What color is your energy, Devon?
Mine is fuchsia.
Fuchsia, like the sign behind you?
Sort of.
That's kind of fuchsia, right?
Fuchsia adjacent.
Fuchsia adjacent. Stan, are you down?
Mine is amber, baby.
Yours is amber? Yeah.
Whoa.
I thought yours was
Wouldn't say
definitely
that.
Boros.
Amber is the color of your energy.
Yeah.
I would say, like, on the spectrum of dudes singing reggae music with an unusual accent, which is probably not their natural speaking voice, I'm more on the sublime side of that spectrum.
Yeah.
But
I don't really know a lot about 311. I just think they're very funny for some reason. Just intrinsically, they're kind of funny to me. And I've heard that Mr. Hexam is kind of a nice guy, which is great. And I know that there's a lot of devotees, and that's great too. But I just can't help asking people what color their energy is whenever this number comes up.
obviously, we cannot do another episode about energy.
Right.
So we couldn't play into that pun this week.
I really wanted to.
I mean, we could.
Well, we're also, the decks we're discussing today don't even include Mox Amber. So that's another failed attempt to play up the pun.
So you're saying this should have been the Breach episode?
or Boros is the color of our energy is what the title should be for this episode, but we can't do it.
I was looking up other popular 311 songs, or at least ones that have a lot of plays on Spotify.
Sure.
None of them contribute well to a pun. And after listening to them, I didn't even recognize any. Like Incubus.
Could you say that word? Could you say that word the way you said it again? Do you think you could pronounce recognize the way you just said it ever again if you tried?
Did I not just say recognize?
No, you said recognize. It was like
there was a weird emphasis.
It wasn't your native accent, I don't think.
I'm turning into like a weird early post reggae white guy singer.
Yeah.
I had a point.
Your destiny, and here it is.
I had a point, and you took it from me.
Did you have a point?
Just like usual.
Yeah, it was a good one. But it was about Incubus. So here's a fun fact.
Okay.
I once got to see Incubus live.
Got to.
Tickets were free. I was invited, and I said, why the heck not? And I'm at this Incubus concert, and I inexplicably recognized 90% of their music. And it made me realize that Incubus was one of those bands that got a lot of radio play, had a ton of singles that entered my osmosis, Joseph.
Sure.
311, not one of those. Because I was listening to Beautiful Disaster. This is the titles of their songs. Beautiful Disaster, Love Song, all mixed up. None of this contributes well to a podcast title.
They have a song called Love Song?
It's their third most, or one of their 5 most played songs.
Like The Cure? Is it a cover of The Cure?
I don't think so.
They also did that song Butterfly, right?
No, that was Crazy Town.
I know. I also just think Crazy Town. I mean, rest in peace, but I also just think Crazy Town is kind of funny as well. All right. I think we took this as far as we can go.
No, we can go further.
Can we?
We can say Ja free. Hello and welcome to episode 311 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies for the casual spike. My name is Stanislav here in Chicago. And with me on the line from the West Side, it's Dave Harbarger. What up, Dave?
Here I am. Hi. I forget what I was going to say. I said a lot of things already, and I don't need to say more.
Yeah, because I'm about to humble you after introducing Devon, aka Doomwake.
That's me. I will say, Dave never said what the color of his energy was. He only asked us.
Gingham.
Okay.
Oh, I thought you were going to say flannel.
Yeah, flannel, gingham, like whatever this is, mini buffalo check.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Devon, have you been keeping score of the record between me and David in our casual home kitchen table Magic the Gathering sealed and limited tournaments?
No, I haven't. Should I have?
We thought you had that covered.
Okay, that's my
someone was
bad.
keeping the tally.
I never got that email.
Well,
Oops.
we're neck and neck. We've been neck and neck.
Are you?
We were. But Stanislav had a really powerful Friday.
Yes, you did. Yeah. We drafted Aether Drift, care of some PR packs that we got from Wizards of the Coast with a group of friends. So thank you, Wizards of the Coast, and thank you to Polygon for hooking us up with the opportunity of last week to talk with Mark Rosewater and all those things. But yes, we drafted, and I did a bad thing, Devon. I'll let Stan take his lap, and then I'll tell you what I did.
Well, David once again forced the Aether Spark.
Well, I can't force the Aether Spark. I just opened it.
You somehow
and
still
backed.
tried. You still somehow tried to force this one
Yeah.
easy to play, colorless artifact planeswalker.
Mm-hmm.
And I just played Golgari because people kept passing me Golgari gold cards. I had like
Yeah.
3 Golgari gold cards. 2 of them were rares. It was
Yes.
awesome.
Yes.
I don't know a lot about this format, but the Golgari gold cards are quite good, right? There's the one that surveils and the wagon that blows something up.
Yes,
Yeah, there's,
exactly.
like,
And black
gain
and green
endurance.
are the best 2 colors in the
Yes.
format as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I played like this weird mid-range control deck where like half of my strategy was gaining as much life off of gain lands. So then I would like end up a lot of games at like 25 life.
Yeah.
Eventually figure out how to find enough mana to cast my like 6 and 7 drop vanilla dinosaurs and play a couple Golgari gold cards and crush David in the process.
Now, I will say,
What will you
it was,
say? What are you
it
going to
was
say?
somewhat validating. No, it was somewhat validating when your friends kept coming up and going, hey, how's this going? And Stan just said, you know how important it is to me to beat David. I don't want to talk right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I made a classic mistake, Devon. And the classic mistake was I tried to force an archetype and was waiting for the gold uncommon, the payoff gold uncommon to show up because I
Dave.
thought nobody else would. And
Dave.
we opened an entire box. 7 people, we drafted a whole box.
Yeah.
And I was like, there's going to be one Haunt the Network, and I'm going to get Haunt the Network. And I did not get Haunt the Network. So my deck was mediocre. It was like a fine blue-black artifact deck with an Aether Spark in it. It was fine. But Stan did beat me. We did go down to the end. I mean, I almost decked myself, and you did complain that I had answers for all of your good cards, and then you had one last creature that killed me. Basically.
That's how you win a game of Magic.
You
It
can't kill
is.
everything.
It is. Yeah, you can't.
Yeah.
You can't.
Yeah, it's, one of the things that we like to do when we play our monthly cube draft, EDH tournament, or, whatever the new limited set is, we do a 4-pack draft. So we still play with 40 cards, but when you crack 4 packs, your decks are juiced.
Yeah.
And this set has been really fun for juiced drafting.
Yeah. We could talk about limited all day. I have been playing a lot of it for Aether Drift. Did not do well in the Arena Open. I only fired 1 bullet at it, though, and it didn't get to day 2 even.
Same.
Unfortunately.
I fired
Yeah,
one,
did you try
one
two?
bullet, and no, my deck was not great. I've been told that you had to open like a bunch of rares, and I didn't have a lot in my deck.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, well.
It's a fun format. Anyway, what are we talking about in this week for real?
Yeah, this is not a limited episode.
No.
This is a modern episode. Devon has been practicing for RC Charlotte. So we're going to check in with Devon on his work with Red Green Eldrazi. I'm assuming it's Red Green Eldrazi, but maybe he's got another color up the sleeve. It's colorless. Then
Colorless is the color of Devon's energy, by the way.
That should have been my answer. Now that I think about it,
waste. Waste is the color of your energy. And then I wanted to wrap up the episode with a dose of Ketramose, because the hot new card from Aether Drift, for a minute there, it was everywhere. Things have finally leveled out a little bit, but I finally played some Orzhov Blink featuring Ketramose, and I got news for you, y'all. I can't wait to talk about it.
Oh, that's great. We are going to talk quickly about what the state of Modern is at the moment, just for fun. There was an RC in China this weekend, so we're going to talk about the results from that tournament quickly as a table setting to this conversation about Eldrazi and Blink, because guess what? Those are two of the most played decks in Modern right now.
Nice.
Stan, first, housekeeping. What do you got?
We have a new patron, Sebastian D. Thanks for joining the nation. If you'd like to join the nation, dive down, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown. We got a store full of swag at thedivedown.com/store. You can get 10% off your order from Heavy Play with promo code thedivedown2025 over at heavyplay.com. Save some money on Mana Traders with promo code thedivedown, all one word. Technically, it gets you 25% cash back after 3 months. But if you look at your annual budget, 25% cash back is like, it's what's one of those cards? Like
a gift card, a rebate?
No, it's like a card that you spend 2 on, but then it gives you a color, like a treasure back or something. Like Deadly Dispute.
Yes.
Yeah, the new Mana Traders code is the Deadly Dispute of promo codes.
There you go. Devon is holding up his Heavy Play carry box, by the way, to go back to Heavy Play. Devon, how are you liking your gift package that you got from Heavy Play?
There's some really, really cool stuff that they got down the pipeline. And I've been really impressed with it. It looks, the quality is amazing and good stuff.
Now, what do you put in your carrier? All your commander decks?
Decks? No, just like my constructed decks.
And a maybe board? Do you have a large maybe board?
No, just like, I don't know, a couple standard decks, a couple modern decks.
And he's ready to go.
Why are you being weird about it?
How many dice trays are you putting in there?
There's none in there right now because I have it full of decks, but maybe one.
Okay.
I like it. All right. So that's housekeeping. And thank you to all of our sponsors. Proud we are of all of them.
I wasn't being weird. Was I being weird?
A little. But that's okay. That's your thing.
That's my thing. I guess I'm the weird guy. I just wanted to know what was in the box.
What's in the box?
Well, you found out.
Look, if I was weird, would I be wearing these sunglasses?
Definitely. Oh, wow.
Those are nice.
Yeah.
Listeners, you are not prepared for the shape of the sunglasses that Stanislav just put on.
Yeah.
They are triangular.
Yeah, I'm going to keep these on.
They're also amber colored.
Yes, they are.
You know, I want to do one more mention about the Patreon, is that if you subscribe to our Patreon, you get new episodes of my Patreon exclusive sister show with Shane, former co-host, now producer. Episode 3 is dropping imminently. I know this because we've recorded it.
Yeah.
We talk about Earthbound for the Super Nintendo. We talk about emulating retro games and slightly more contemporary games that you want to back up and put on a different device.
Yeah. Now that's not on every episode you talk about Earthbound. Your show is called
What's That About? It's called What's That in Your Pocket, and it's about handheld gaming. And yeah, I talk about playing an emulator on my iPhone and how easy and fun it was.
I love it. Check it out. What's That in Your Pocket? It's at least as good as the Dive Down.
Yes, it's available on a Dive Down Patreon subscription near you. All right, let's get into Modern. David.
We're dipping our toes back into Modern. It's time.
I'm going to set you up for your China talk, because here's what I've noticed over the last 5 months, give or take. This format has been incredibly dynamic. After the bans in December and the unbans, we saw a huge shift that took a month or two for Breach to really emerge. And then after Breach clawed its little claws into the format, we started to see things like Orzhov Blink and Eldrazi make a name for themselves as potential counter strategies, or at least other viable strategies within the format, where Boros Energy, I think, was starting to lose some of its ground. And now the addition of Aether Drift and Ketramose in particular, I think has breathed a lot of life into the Orzhov deck in particular, though some other decks have been trying it too. I'm curious whether or not you're going to show us that China reflects how dynamic the format has been, or if it's kind of what we've been expecting and maybe even more of what we saw from Charlotte.
You mean from Portland?
Portland, thank you. Yep.
Yeah. So I would say, yeah, it's reflecting what we saw in Portland right now. So there was an RC in China, as I mentioned this week. It only had 300 people, which is pretty small for an RC, but that's all good. It's still a big tournament. I think that, yes, the format is dynamic. And if you look around anecdotally, I think there's this interesting mix of people, as far as vibes go. People are kind of saying Breach needs to go, but they're also saying we're enjoying the format. So there's this kind of interesting mix of those two things. But why don't we just hop into the meta of what the tournament was? I was helped a little bit in this breakdown by a post that I found by Lectress on Reddit, user u/Lectress. So appreciate the write-up that you did. I also went to MTG Goldfish to look at some of the stats for what it's worth. And here's what I learned. The overall meta, based on what MTG Goldfish said it was in their percentage breakdown, number one was other.
What?
So first time in a while that we've had a tournament where 17% was other, 16.9%.
We're cured.
We can talk about that later. But there were 3 decks above 10% of the meta. Grinding Station at 15.2% of the meta. Eldrazi Ramp at 13.5% of the meta. Boros Energy, 12.6% of the meta. So 3 decks above 10%, kind of the 3 decks that we imagined.
Yeah.
When was the last time did we see a major Modern tournament where Boros wasn't one of the top 3?
It is, well, we can't count other.
Yes, we can.
No, well, we haven't been in that sense. So Boros is still one of the top 3 decks in this particular tournament.
Sure, among defined decks, but other is still bigger.
Yes, bracket undefined.
Okay.
Well, usually we just have other at the bottom of the list, right? So it never kind of gets lumped in with the rest of it.
Correct. Yeah, I just wanted to point it out because there have been times recently where other was smaller than the top couple of decks. So it's interesting to see that.
All I see is what is directly in front of me. That's all I know and accept as truth.
Yeah, you exist in this moment and you're gone beyond space and time thanks to your glasses.
You love them.
I do love them. Top 3 decks, all above 10%. All right, the break from there is to decks that are below 10%. And there are 5 that I think are worth mentioning that are above 2%. So they're between 2 and 10% of the meta. The top there is Orzhov Midrange, 7.62%. Amulet Titan, 4.97%. Mill, 3.97%. Domain Zoo, 3.3%. Belcher, 2.65%. So,
Dave, did you just say Mill?
I said Mill. Mill was the 6th most played deck in this tournament with 12 entrants.
I mean, small field, but that's kind of wild.
It gets a little wilder, just in the sense that there's also a Mill in the top that made it into top 32. I believe that the Mill person actually was double checking right now. Mill was 16th place.
Well, Mill players who frequently love to claim they have no bad matchups have been saying in particular that it's great against Breach, that Breach is like a buy for them.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's a good point.
I could buy that.
Because Tasha's like just exiles half the deck.
Yeah, and they got a bunch of Surgicals main deck, so can't be that bad.
All right. Any surprises here? What do you all think about this particular meta distribution? It feels pretty fairly consistent with Portland and with other larger tournaments that we've seen in the last couple of weeks. Nothing too surprising. Couple of points here and there.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of, this is the metagame that we expected it to be. I don't really know what's going to change or what would require a change in these top 3 or 4 decks. It's really just going to be this for the foreseeable future. I mean, sometimes you'll see some fluctuation where, like Stan mentioned earlier that, this is kind of the first tournament that Boros was not really in like the top 1 or 2, it feels like. But not really a ton else to say, to be honest.
This is the metagame you've been preparing for then as well.
Yeah.
Stan, similar thoughts?
Nothing to add that I haven't already said.
Okay. Well, here's a more interesting part of the story. I think if you look at the top 32, this is where things get a little bit wilder. So if you look at the top 32 decks in this tournament, 11 of the top 32 were Breach.
Mm-hmm.
Surprise.
Is it?
5 of the top 8 were Breach.
Yeah.
Including the winning deck.
Still not surprised.
Yeah.
Also not surprised.
Yikes. So here's a couple of things I thought were pretty cool. It is playing a new card, or most of the decks are playing a new card, and that card is Stock Up from Aether Drift. That is the Divination, the 2 generic and a blue for look at the top 5 cards of your library, select 2, put the other 3 on the bottom of your library in a random order. They are playing 1 to 2 copies of this deck main, like more than 2/3 of the decks, I would say, of these 11 decks in the top 32. Notably, the winning deck was not playing Stock Up, but most of the other ones were.
It's a little interesting, the fact that it, 3 mana seems like it is kind of a lot in Modern right now, but it does kind of make sense because it finds you both pieces of the combo. Like you can find the Breach and the Station if you're missing that. In the post-board games, if you're in the Pharah plan, you can find a Saga with it. So,
is anyone playing more copies than like 1 or 2?
1 or 2, that's it. Yeah, it's definitely not like a staple, but most of them are playing a couple.
There is a scenario where you're casting this on turn 1. You play Opal, Amber, Bauble, and then you're casting this on turn 1, and that's
pretty sick.
That seems good.
That's a sick reload right there. Make sure you have the cards that you want, and here you go.
Or Bauble, Opal. There's a lot of ways to play 0 mana artifacts on 1.
Yeah, I will say this card very powerful in my experience in Limited, so I'm kind of stoked to see it popping up in some in Modern. I've also heard that it's popping up in Pioneer, Standard, and Vintage. Even I've seen people trying to play it there too. Mini Dig Through Time, I suppose. Dug Through Time, perhaps we could call it. And a bunch of these other ones have interesting sideboard cards. Like one of them had a Kappa Cannoneer in the side. Another one had Renin 6 in the side. There's all kinds of like random teching going on in the Breach decks right now for people to kind of make them their own. But bottom line, it's like 33% of the winners metagame, the top 32 metagame. The next is Orzhov. 6 decks of the top 32 are Orzhov. They're all playing 4 Ketramose.
Yeah.
Orzhov also came in second. Stan will have more to say about it later, I'm sure. I didn't see a lot of variance in these lists particularly, or anything that was too surprising at this point. Just looked like the Blink decks from a few weeks ago. Now they have 4 Ketramose in them. I did wonder at one point in time if we were going to play all 4, but people are definitely playing all 4.
I was wondering if maybe the Orzhov Necro deck was going to show up. I don't know if you guys saw that won one of the challenges this weekend or last weekend, and that looks like they're all Blinks, so at least nothing here.
Yeah, I didn't see it in the top 32 for sure. It might have been farther down on the list. That deck is definitely percolating around and causing other pitch spells to spike in price. So thanks for that, Necro Ketramose. So between Breach and Orzhov, that's 6 of the top 8 decks in the top 8. So before I go on through the top 32 metagame breakdown, I'm just going to say what the other 2 decks in the top 8 were. One is Azorius Control, which is fascinating. Yeah. It is as stock as you can imagine for an Azorius Control list to be in Modern at this particular point in time. It's not Jeskai Control. It is running the Narset Days Undoing combo along with Gyre Reach Sanitarium. It's doing like that kind of like hand control. And the deck also has 4 Orim's Chant main deck.
Yeah. This is so stock, it's playing 2 Teferi, Hero of Dominaria.
Yes.
Remember that card?
Were they playing Scepters?
No, they were not.
Really?
I seriously just checked this list again, even though I checked it last night, Devon, to make sure there were no Isochron Scepters in here. Dang. Doesn't it feel like there should be?
I mean, if you got 4 Arms Chants, like, I thought that was the idea, I guess they're just playing them as Time Walks.
Yeah. Time Walks that they can do, and then helping, have some main board tech against Breach specifically to screw them up longer term.
4 Narset Tuesday isn't doing too.
Yep, exactly. So we are playing this weird kind of like hand control blue-white thing. And then the 7th, so that deck was in 8th place. And in 7th place, Yawgmoth.
Yes.
Including 4 Dredger's Insight from Aether Drift, which is an enchantment. It's a generic and a green, and it says, whenever one or more artifact or creature cards leave your graveyard, you gain 1 life. And when this enchantment enters, mill 4 cards. You may put an artifact, creature, or land card from among the milled cards into your hand.
That's neat.
I think it maybe sets up some other combo lines because it like triggers off of Young Wolf. So if you have Young Wolf plus Yawgmoth, every time you go through the Young Wolf back, you get the life back off of the Treasurer's Insight. So I think it lets you do some cool stuff there.
Yeah, it's like, don't you usually need like Blood Artist or something to make that work? And now you have it working the other way for you.
Yeah.
So makes sense.
I like that I can like get you a Soul Cauldron. It can set up Soul Cauldron to do more stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
Card's interesting.
Yeah, it is an interesting card for sure. Okay, other notable decks from the top 32. We had 3 Eldrazi. These were all marked as totally different deck names, which is kind of funny. One was called Abzan Affinity.
Okay.
So they look like normal lists to me. There was 2 Teamer ones and 1 red-green one. The highest finishing Eldrazi deck was in 18th place. Worth noting. Devon will be talking more about Eldrazi in a moment. There were 3 energy lists in the top 32. One was Jeskai, 2 were Boros. One of them was running 2 Dismember main deck, which I was like, isn't that why we're playing Discharge? Why are we doing this too? But pretty interesting. The highest finisher among the energy decks is 21st.
Dismember, I think, is for Ketramose.
Oh, yep. Makes sense. Get rid of an indestructible thing. And then there were a few one-ofs in the top 32, and I'm just going to go through them real quick. There was a Merfolk. There was a Zoo. There was a Neo Brand. There was Dimir Death Shadow, which is Death Shadow Mockingbird dressed down with 4 frogs in the side. We're not even playing frog in the main. Esper Frog, Oculus with 4 Ketramose. It goes pretty good with Oculus, I guess. Tamishi Belcher and Mill were your one-ofs in the top 38. And then I guess the other thing I would say is the 2 things that were having a little resurgence in the challenges, but I did not see in the top 32, Amulet. There wasn't as much Amulet in this particular tournament, but it's still around online for sure. And then Burn, which seems like Stan has been saying has been having a little bit of a comeback thanks to playing Bolt Wave and Lava Spike. It's turning up online, but it didn't show up in this particular tournament for what it's worth.
Yeah, I don't know if Bolt Wave is why it's having a comeback.
It is. We just need as many Lava Spikes as possible.
We've had that one for a while, right? I think
it's been 3 months.
I think part of it is maybe that Eidolon is in a good spot right now because Eidolon's so good against Breach.
Makes sense. Yeah.
But I got to say, as a Burn player, you do not want to play against Flage.
No way.
What if as a Burn player you played your own Flage?
No.
I saw someone do that with like a top 8 burn list. They had 1 Flage, and I said,
Just
"Ooh,
one.
you read my article. You read my spoiler article."
Spicy.
Why didn't they have Amp Raptor?
They didn't feel like cheating, I guess.
Thoughts, questions, concerns about this meta right now? Feels like going into Charlotte. This is what Devon's been preparing for, right? Although the overabundance of Breach in the top 32, I'm sure, is a little like, and also we saw it coming.
Yeah, I mean, definitely 11 out of 32 is maybe more than I'd like, but I mean, I've been preparing for the tournament as if Breach is going to be the most played deck, and I don't think that's going to change, so.
Perfect. Well, why don't we hop right into it, Devon, since you've been preparing for the tournament, thinking about Breach.
Sure. Yeah, let's
do it. Where
are
you at with Eldrazi right now?
All right. So started a couple of weeks ago when I kind of finally decided that I was not going to play Boros. I think part of that is just it seems like every other deck around Boros is getting better and getting new tools and adapting more to the metagame. And it just seems like Boros, I don't know if it's that it doesn't have the tools or if it's just everybody else is getting so much more powerful and it doesn't really have the capability to kind of match that same power level. There's only so many things you can do with a bunch of small red and white creatures. So After that, I kind of decided that I wanted to lean into just testing as much Eldrazi as possible. And the first list that I have up here was the list that I initially started with, which is, you'll see, just very more, as stock as humanly possible. This is, I believe, the same exact list that got second place in Portland. Just really hasn't changed the card since then. And it's fine for what it is. I think this is probably the most consistent version of Eldrazi. But as I was playing this list, I learned a lot of things about the Eldrazi deck, and I think this version in particular. And kind of have some things that I wanted to discuss as to, if there's anything that I don't like about this version. So just for, posterity's sake, the list is, like I said, the stock version. So it's got 3 cards in the main, 2 Writhing Chrysalis, 3 Devourer, 3 Worldbreaker, 3 Emrakul. The only other difference is there's 21 lands and 2 Ancient Stirrings. Some people play 22 lands and no Stirrings. But I think the concept is that Stirrings is kind of sort of like your extra lands, but it's a better top deck later on because it can dig you into more gas. But there were some things, like I said, that I didn't like about this list. And the first one, now...
Looks like there's one pretty big thing that you don't like about this list.
Yeah. So
maybe a big silver thing.
Well, here's the weird thing, right? We've been talking all about, I know the Breach is going to be the most played deck, and, going into the tournament, you have to have a good plan against Breach, right? And the whole concept of playing Karn the Great Creator in your main deck is that card is lights out against Breach. If you have it in play, they can't combo you. And I don't disagree that Karn is fantastic against Breach. Every time you play Karn on turn 2, it's really hard for them to win. The problem is Karn kind of sucks in every other matchup.
Oh, no.
Because the thing about this particular deck, compared to maybe some other Karn the Great Creator decks that you've seen in the past, is the sideboard is not really juiced for Karn. Like, if you look at the list, the stock list that everybody's playing, it's like an Explosives, a Tormod's Crypt, a Haywire Might, a Coding, and a Jailer. And that's it. There's no Cityscapes, none of that stuff.
There are some Stone Brains, but why put 2 extra Writhing Chrysalis in the sideboard? What is that card for?
Well, funny enough, that card comes in when Karn comes out. So against Boros, you cut the Karns and you board in the 2 Chrysalis and the 1 Kozilek's Return. Because Karn is terrible against Boros.
Okay.
Yeah. Are you going to get deeper into Chrysalis, or should we just talk for a second, later, or should we talk for a second about, because there's a mega combo with Chrysalis, right? That involves Kazi's return or Kazi's command and stuff.
Yeah, you just OTK them. So Chrysalis is phenomenal. We're going to get into why Chrysalis is good a little bit more in the second updated version.
Sure.
So we'll save that for a little bit later.
Yeah.
But yeah, honestly, Karn just kind of sucks. It comes out against Boros. It comes out against Black-White. It comes out against, I guess you kind of want it against Amulet. It can be good in the mirror because getting Coding can start the Stone Rain train. But even then it's I don't know. It just feels too slow. So that's first thing that I notice is that sure. Yeah, it's good against Breach, but really bad against everything else. A lot of decks, as the Eldrazi deck becomes more popular and people kind of understand what their role is in the matchup, a lot of people can just fight through the land destruction. This version, for example, is playing 4 Myco Spawn and 3 Worldbreaker. That's a lot of Stone Rains. But that is a big part of your plan. And for people who are much lower to the ground, like Boros, for example, or Breach, who just has a bunch of artifact mana, your Stone Rain plan against them is not even close to good enough. So, you kind of need to have a slightly different angle of attack that maybe involves a little bit more aggression early on. We'll get to that in a second. And then as the third point here, didn't feel aggressive enough, right? And that's kind of ties into the decks being able to play through the land destruction, where you kind of are a little bit more linear in terms of your early game plan is really relying on land destruction, and your late game is cast fatties. But if your early game plan is not good enough in a lot of spots, then you're not even going to get to the late game in the first place. And then last but not least, the land count was a little bit too low. So this version that, the more stock version plays 21 lands. I kind of like to be somewhere in the 22 to 23 range. The theory is that Ancient Stirrings kind of provides you those extra lands. The problem is, when you have hands that have Utopia Sprawl, you don't really have a good window to cast Stirrings, because you want to sprawl on turn 1 and then play, a 4-mana spell on turn 2, whether that's Chrysalis or Sowing Mycospawn. But you don't really have a window for Stirrings in those hands. So it gets a little bit awkward sometimes. So, for all of these reasons, I was not really liking the current builds of Eldrazi, the more kind of stock versions. And this is when I started talking to Zandy, because you had mentioned, that Zandy was playing Eldrazi in Portland, and he's been playing this deck forever. So talked a little bit with Zandy. Yeah, Lawson.
Zandy, long-term friend of the Dive Down. One of our early Patreon supporters, actually, which is how we met him. He just showed up in the Discord one day and was like, "Hey, I love your show. I have things to say." Always has great insights about whatever he's looking at Magic. Super, super nice guy. So, working with Lawson.
Yep. And I I messaged him on social media. We had a couple of chats, and he it caught my attention because he had played a version in Portland that didn't have Karn. And I was like, okay, well, I had kind of been interested in cutting Karn in the first place. Let's see what his list looked like. Now, his Portland list was, I will say, maybe a little bit more reserved than what we have in front of you here. But he had been talking to me, and he had been mentioning that he had been working on a list that featured 4 copies of Harrogast Erupting Nullkite, which I will read this one for the listeners at home, because you may not have remembered this one. So this is the Emerge Eldrazi. So it's 9 mana for a 6/6 flying. Has Emerge for 6 red, which means you can cast it by sacrificing a creature and paying the difference in mana cost. When you cast the spell, you may exile your hand. If you do, draw 3. And then the important part is that it gives each creature you cast Emerge, and the Emerge cost is equal to its mana cost. So every single creature you play now has Emerge, which means you can sacrifice creatures to get a discount on the mana cost. Right?
Yep. Right.
So the joke is that when you have a Harrogast in play, your Emrakul the Promised End has Emerge, and you can sacrifice the Harrogast to cast the Emrakul. The funny part is, Promised End still gets the discount. So if you have 4 card types in your graveyard, your Promised End would cost 9. The Harrogast also costs 9. You can cast the Emrakul for free just by sacrificing Harrogast.
How are we sneaking Harrogast out early? Just out of curiosity, like what's that sequence like?
So that is part of, if you look at the list, so there's 4 Sowing Mycospawn and 4 Writhing Chrysalis. Remember, the last version only had 2 Chrysalis, so we've gone up to the full 4 copies of each of these 4 drops. Now, the dream scenario is that you have one of these 4 drops on turn 2, which you can do in a couple of different ways. You can go turn 1, Labyrinth Talisman, and then turn 2, play another colored source. That gets you 4 mana. You can go turn 1, Utopia Sprawl, turn 2, 2 mana land. That gets you 4 mana. But basically, some form or another, 4 mana on turn 2, cast one of your 4s. And then on turn 3, you would have, now remember, both of your 4 drops give you 2 mana back, right? Because Chrysalis gives you 2 spawns, and Mycospawn can search for a 2 mana land. So no matter which 4 drop you have, you're always going to get 2 mana back, right? So you have 4 mana on turn 2. The 2 mana you got back from the Mycospawn or Chrysalis, that's 6. Your land drop for turn 3 is 7 mana. Okay? Harrogast, using 4 of that 7 mana, sacrifice your 4 drop. You have 3 mana available left over. Okay? Now, even if you had nothing in the graveyard, right? Remember, the Emrakul costs 13. Say you have just the one creature you put in the graveyard from the Emerge, that gets you 1 card type. It costs 12, right? So you have 12 mana Emrakul and a 9 mana Harrogast in play. And that 3 mana left over, that's the difference.
Wow. So you're turn 3ing Emrakuls here, or turn 4ing?
Turn 3.
Turn 3.
Turn 3 with an kind of an alarming amount of consistency, to be honest with you. I did it when I played this league. I think I had 4 turn 3 Emrakuls. So it happens quite a bit.
Wow.
And okay, so when that happens, what's the fail rate? Like, who's winning? Who's beating you in that situation?
Not really a lot, to be honest with you. I mean, Emrakul it's really hard for a lot of decks to beat it. I mean, against Breach, like for example, if they're about to combo you and you Emrakul them, you can combo them, but have them just mill themselves out.
Just dump their hand or mill themselves. Yeah.
Against Black-White, even in the games where they Solitude your Emrakul, they have so many ways to like rebuy Solitude between Overlord and things like that. You can still kind of annihilate their whole board with their own Solitude. There was a situation where it was like turn 3, they had the Solitude, so they Solituded my Emrakul, and then I just went Overlord, buy back the Solitude, Solitude, evoke another white card, kill their Felia, and it's just like, it just doesn't matter. So, but yeah, I would say the games, I didn't lose a game where I had turn 3 Emrakul.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So it has this, and then the fail state is kind of like, we're going to kill you with the twin style kill from Chrysalis plus command, or we just play a value game if we don't hit the combo. And we're just kind of, so what we have here is like a ramp deck that can just put giant creatures on the board, but can also combo you out with an early super giant card. Is that kind of the way you're thinking about it?
Yeah, basically, where you kind of like, you're sort of not necessarily your primary game plan is to try and do the Haragast plus Emrakul thing. But the really nice thing about Writhing Chrysalis, as I was talking about earlier, that card just kills people really quickly. And even in the games where it doesn't kill people, it blocks kind of everything, where it has reach. So not only does it have reach, but it's kind of hard to kill. Like the turn you play it, it is a 4/5 creature. So it kind of blocks everything out of Boros except for Flage, I guess. And you mentioned the kind of the combo kill, which to be fair, doesn't happen super often because you do need a whole bunch of mana. But the line that Dave is referring to is when you cast a Kozilek's command, sacrificing a whole bunch of spawns to draw cards and make more spawns. And then the spawns that you make off of the Kozilek's command can then be sacrificed to pump the Chrysalis again, so on and so forth. And if you find more Kozilek's commands off of the other Kozilek's commands, then you can kind of just chain them a bunch. And I think there was one game where I dealt my opponent, I want to say 16 with a Chrysalis in one turn, which wasn't enough for lethal, but I mean, it was basically enough to just like make it so they couldn't really come back. But yeah, I've been liking this version a lot. I did have a lot of struggles with the Karn version, and this one has seemed to be a lot more powerful. I will mention this, like the mulligan decisions are a little bit weird with this one compared to the normal version of Eldrazi, where the normal version, you're kind of just like, mulligan to a hand that's got a little bit of mana. Maybe you don't really care what your threat is. But this one, because you can turn 3 Emrakul so consistently, you really are mulliganing aggressively to one of those hands that has a 4-drop and access to 4 mana on turn 2. Like you'll prioritize those hands a lot more than in the previous version. And the other thing too that I noticed that I found myself doing was even in hands where I had access to, say, 6 mana on turn 3 and had the ability to double kick a Myco spawn, I was still casting the 4 mana Myco spawn on turn 2 just because of that potential of the turn 3 Emrakul.
Makes sense to me.
The other cool thing about Haragast, just real quick, is that you can chain them. And what I mean by that is you can actually sack Haragast to play a Haragast for free because it's 9/9. So what you can do, because you're playing 4, and every time you cast them, you exile your hand and draw 3, is that even if you don't have the Emrakul, you can go Haragast, draw 3, second Haragast, draw 3, and then eventually just find the Emrakul off of it. So that's kind of cool.
That is hilarious. Because you're like, I don't need a hand anymore, so we're going for it.
Yeah.
Let's just go. So you're in.
Oh, I'm
in on this sort of combo-esque Eldrazi version.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like, I'm not really happy about cutting the Karns from the main deck, just because, like, again, it does make the Breach matchup significantly worse. But really against Breach, my plan is to either win the die roll and have turn 3 Emrakul, or hope that my 10 sideboard cards are good enough, because I do have 10 of them.
Wow. I love it.
What are your best matchups? Like what I guess, what are you hoping to play? What are you hoping to play? What are you hoping to dodge?
Boros is still fantastic. I think this version is actually probably a little bit better against the Eldrazi Mirror too, because as I mentioned, Karn is not fantastic against them. And because this version can play Emrakul faster than the other version, you just Emrakul them first, and that's kind of all that matters in the mirror match. So I like it against the that version. And I also like it a lot more against Black-White because so not only is Black-White playing a lot of graveyard hate, so it makes like hard casting, quote unquote, Emrakul a little bit harder. Harrogast giving you the discount on Emrakul makes it so you can actually still cast it even through all of that, relic and all the graveyard hate they have. And through all of the like Flicker Wisp and White Orchid Phantom blowing up your soul lands, because you are less reliant on those because Harrogast gives you a discount on Emrakul. I think that matchup is a lot better too. So basically everything but Breach.
You just think Breach is the worst? Just your worst matchup, period?
It's weird because even with the Karn version, I still think Breach is favored. Like even when I had Karns, I played a whole bunch of games against Breach, and I was still losing.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just because Breach is insane, and you need 4 pieces of hate perfectly timed to hopefully beat them.
Yeah.
4 pieces of perfectly timed hate plus a creature that they can't remove.
So, and it basically at the end of the day, I figured, well, if I'm losing with Karn anyways, I might as well just make every other matchup get better and then, figure out Breach in the postboard games. So,
yeah.
Solid metagaming, I think. All right. I love it. I love it. You and Lawson working together. I love that it's an interesting take on Eldrazi. I'll be curious to see how many other people pick this up, since there were a few people doing this at Portland, something like this at Portland as well. So we'll see where it goes. Stan,
David,
tell us about your new obsession.
I mean, I'm not buying the cards for myself yet, but I think it's probably okay to do that for yourself if you feel compelled to.
I mean, you could just borrow them from me.
You have all of Blink?
I don't have the Overlords. I do have 3 Ketramose.
Hey?
But anyway, so Stan, you played Blink with Ketramose.
Yeah.
The deck that Devon does not believe in, but will not go away.
I didn't say I didn't believe in it.
Okay.
I didn't believe in it either. And then I played it. And now I can tell you, it actually rules.
Does it?
It rules, and I get the appeal. And I'll try to speak to that a little bit as well. But the version I played was by an MTGO user by the name of Riam, who finished 3rd in the Showcase Challenge. And I don't know who this is, but I was looking at their Goldfish resume, and they play a lot of different decks. They seem like they're just kind of like a pretty good modern player, and they venture into other formats as well. But they had what looked like a very well-rounded deck. If I had more time, I would have played the Necro version, but the Necro version is just mono black Necro splashing white for Ketramose.
Yeah.
That's kind of it. And some sideboard cards. Let's talk about Ketramose specifically. I have a question for you two. Do you like drawing cards?
It's literally my favorite thing.
You should put Ketramose in your deck then.
Yeah.
And
Makes sense.
And a bunch of ways to exile stuff. There are just a ton of turns in the Blink deck where you're easily drawing 3 or 4 cards per turn, sometimes to the point where you have to discard to hand size, just by doing the normal Blink stuff and like curving out, playing your creatures, responding to your opponent's plan, while also always drawing a card in the process.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
The deck has such great top decks too, because you just Relic of Progenitus is just Ancestral Recall. Like,
yes. That's
hilarious.
Speaking of Relic, so the deck had to make some kind of adjustment in order to fit Ketramose into the game plan. And one of the best adjustments it made is that it swapped its worst 1-drop, Aether Vial. It's only 1 drop, and also the worst card in the deck, Aether Vial, for 3 or 4 Relic of Progenitus. So now there's a lot of games where you just go turn 1 Relic, which also just like happens to be not bad in the metagame, tagging Flage out of Boros decks, trying to disrupt the Breach decks sometimes in the process. Maybe you can hit Kozilek's Return or, something out of the Eldrazi decks, so they don't get any other graveyard synergy. I don't know that there is any others. But now you have like turn 1 Relic, and turn 2 either like Philia or Emperor of Bones or Overlord of the Baelmerk, turn 3 Ketramose, and that's an incredible curve that is sometimes just like straight up hard to beat. And then you've also been playing a game plan that sets you up to keep drawing cards moving forward, which I think is really important. I also really like that Emperor of Bones is templated as you exile up to 1 target card. So in situations where you or your opponent don't have a lot of stuff in the graveyard, you can play a turn 2 Emperor of Bones, first main phase or second main phase, and just decline to exile anything if you know you have a Ketramose coming, so that you can always like guarantee you're drawing a card. And the way a lot of the cards are templated in the Blink deck is that you can choose when to save it for Ketramose unless you have to pull the trigger. The one card where that's an exception is if you need to like throw out an early Solitude because your opponent has a really important creature that you need to tag. That's kind of it. But even I had a match where all I had on the board was the turn 2 Philia I played into a turn 3 Ketramose. And what I learned in that situation is that if you use Philia to blink Ketramose, Ketramose still triggers. It essentially sees itself off the exile clause. So you get to draw a card, blink the Ketramose, and then you get the 1/1 counter on Philia when Ketramose comes back.
Yeah, I mean, this does seem like the type of card that would have a limiter on it, but yeah, yes. It does not.
Well, they had to put a good card in the set.
There's 2. The other one is Stock Up.
Yeah, there's also that Yawgmoth card, something Dredge.
Yeah, Dredger's Insight.
Yeah.
Yeah, and hey, there's also the Verges. There's 2 Verges in this deck from this set.
Yeah, and those played fine as well, I'll say. Like, I did have games where it's just like, yeah, this is just like a free dual land that is a non-type dual land. I spent a lot of time thinking about how does Ketramose play with the plan? How does the deck support it? And, I mentioned like, it feels like every card supports it, and things like Solitude, Ephemerate, and Flickerwisp have a very obvious interaction with Ketramose, but Ephemerate in particular felt like especially special because it draws you an additional card if you flickered and evoked Solitude. So, there's a lot of games where like you're scamming Solitude essentially, right? You're pitching a card,
right?
Putting Solitude into play, flickering it with an Aether Vial. Sometimes you would be in a situation where that would put you down a card, or at least it would be card neutral, right? If you're pitching and then ephemerating, that's 2 cards plus the Solitude. So you're tagging 2 of your opponent's cards. I guess you're card neutral because you still have a body in the process. With Ketramose on the board, you are drawing cards from Solitude, Exile, Ephemerate bouncing the Solitude, and then the Solitude second exile. So you end up going up on cards, which just made me feel like I'm playing Scam again. And like playing a Scam game where I never run out of cards, always have gas, and I don't have to play Fable of the Mirror Breaker to accomplish that. So that was cool. I mentioned that other decks are sort of picking it up. I talked about Mono Black Necro, just splashing white for some main deck Ketramose and then some sideboard cards. I feel like the problem with that plan is that you don't have the whole package. You just have like a handful of cards that support Ketramose. And what makes Blink, I think, special and really powerful and really consistent right now is that Ketramose is just never dead because all of your cards essentially support it. And I think that also points to the problem with Murktide. A lot of Murktide decks are going for white to play Esper and Ketramose.
More Oculus than Murktide, right? Or is it both?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like the thing that I noticed is that there were back-to-back challenges with a Esper Murktide deck in the top 8. On February 28th, someone finished 5th with 3 main deck Ketramose. The very next day, someone finished 8th with none.
Right.
Which kind of just led me to feel like the Murktide community isn't even sold on this card because while you do have ways to trigger it, a lot of those methods are one-sided, and it's you exiling your own cards from your graveyard with the Oculus or Murktide, and that's just not as consistent. And it's not as consistent of a card advantage engine. It's almost just like an alternate threat that you have to put a ton of work and hope that one of your other initial threats like entered play or at least were cast. So ultimately I see Ketramose being a Orzhov card, and it's the Orzhov card. Any deck or any game where I had this in play, it was just the most important card. Hard to lose.
Did you have any spots where you couldn't attack with it, or like was it just, were you just a little bit short, or no?
So on turn 4, you're not usually able to attack with it.
Oh.
Usually, especially because, and I may have been playing it incorrectly, but I often found that if I had Ketramose in my opener, even with like a turn 1 relic or a turn 2 threat that could exile stuff, I slow rolled the exile effects because I wanted to make sure that the graveyards had resources to trigger the Ketramose later.
Right.
May or may not be correct. I didn't play against Breach or a Flage, so I wasn't necessarily incentivized to keep my opponent's graveyards low. So to answer your question, yes, there were situations where I couldn't attack with Ketramose, but I was still able to attack with something else. And part of that may be my fault because I was taking my time exiling cards. But Ketramose is good even if it can't attack. It's just better when it does.
Yeah.
But even when it can't attack, it's drawing you so many cards that I still felt like it was worth it and really powerful, and still the most important card on the battlefield because it establishes an inevitability that whether you are drawing into your win con or it is your win con, it just gives you an ability to like bury your opponent in cards ultimately, and all those cards just happen to be creatures that flicker or bounce or do something.
Yeah, and it also seems like it kind of decreases the dead draws in your deck, because once you have it in play, like basically everything works with it anyways. Like you're not going out of your way to trigger it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and like, you know, if you're drawing cards to your hand size, that's not the worst thing either, because like you could set up something interesting with Emperor of Bones or Overlord of the Baelmerk as well. So putting a Flicker Wisp in the graveyard, if all of the other cards in your hand are good, doesn't mean you're not going to get to use that Flicker Wisp again, because this deck has an element of recursion. So yeah, card is really cool. It made the deck click for me. And though I hadn't played it in the past, I played against it and had not been impressed facing it down. Playing this deck with Ketramose was extremely fun. It's just a fun deck to play where you're doing something every turn, interacting a lot while establishing a board. I understand the appeal, and it felt pretty strong. I lost to Murktide, I will say. And that's because the flood of counters to keep me off Ketramose or a threat was enough. Like counter spells plus spot removal was good. And they just like used Fatal Push on all my little guys and then counterspell for Ketramose or Overlord. And that was an effective strategy. But yeah, I think the deck is awesome. And I can see it sticking around because of Ketramose specifically. Like I think this is just like a very sleevable deck now. And there was talk of this being the first like truly good Orzhov deck in Modern in like the better part of the last 5+ years. And it's hard for me to imagine a scenario where Philia plus Emperor of Bones plus Ephemerate plus Solitude plus Ketramose and Overlord like isn't just like a really good shell. Because those 5-6 cards work together so well. And I'm here for it.
I love it.
Here for the long haul.
Why not?
Here for the new dawn.
You're so Stannis, what you're saying is you're a Taxes gamer now.
It's not taxes. It's not even taxes.
Is it at least death?
It's exile.
So it's exile and taxes. I see.
It's exile and taxes. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not ready to cash out of Boros because Modern RCQ season is just around the corner.
It's coming back. I didn't even realize it was coming back again.
Oh, yeah.
April.
Just like that.
April RCQs bring May RCs, as they say.
Is it only April?
Nah, it's Q2.
Okay. Sweet. Well, I guess I would love to pick a new deck for the one tournament I'll go to with you, or two that I'll go to with you.
Yeah, I think you'll like this one. I will say, to tie in upcoming RCQ season plus Charlotte, it feels like the timing of the March BNR is going to serve the RCQ season really well. I'd be a little annoyed about Charlotte knowing that like Breach is going to be the most played deck and could very well like put 3 or 4 copies in the top 8, and there's just sort of nothing we can do about it. But
I mean, this is kind of the same position we were in the past 2 formats, right?
yeah.
But at least people have been saying anecdotally they're enjoying this format.
It's for what it is. It's not that bad.
Right.
I enjoy playing this format more than I have the past 2 formats. So
That's good. And we'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks.
Sweet.
Devon, best of luck in Charlotte.
thank you. I'll be casting.
I wish I had recommendations for you on where to get food, but I do not.
I don't. I've never been to Charlotte, so
Is there good food in Charlotte?
I mean, I assume
I'm
there's good
assuming
food.
so.
Good food everywhere. So I'll find it.
If you know where Devon should go in Charlotte,
Yeah, send me a message.
send a message. Let us know. Leave a comment.
And until then, let's wrap up this week's show.
That's right.
If you haven't yet, subscribe to our podcast. Get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. If you use Apple or Spotify, please leave us a rating and review. I haven't seen any reviews in Apple in calendar year 2025.
No, we've been getting nice comments on Spotify about our interview with Mark Rosewater last week. A number of people commented. A few people said, hey, it's so great to see you guys getting your due or whatever. I just want to be really clear. If you want us to have access to this, and by us, I mean Stan, and by Stan, I mean me by proxy, have access to opportunities like that, go and check out when Stan has articles up on Polygon. Let people at Polygon know that you love that Stan is the person who writes about Magic the Gathering for them, or one of the people that writes about Magic the Gathering for them, because that is the source of all of this insider information that we get. One way or another.
It's true. I have a couple stories coming out in March. So
Yeah.
I'll promote those. Keep an eye out. It'll be good, though. One of them I'm especially excited about. The other one will be good, but one of them is really, really good.
Yeah, really good.
If you'd like to submit a question to us in general or just reach out and tell us how much you love our show, you can find us on Blue Sky, The Dive Down, or email thedivedown@gmail.com. You can support us over on Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown. Buy our swag at thedivedown.com/store. Keep an ear out for the newest episode of What's That in Your Pocket? Is it a phone or is it the coolest new emulator device? Why not both? That's episode 3 of WTIYP. Head over to Heavy Play to get some incredible deck and dice boxes and carrying cases and play mats and dice trays and everything you need to have a really fun tournament. And if you use promo code TheDiveDown2025, you'll get 10% off your first order at heavyplay.com. Shout out to Mana Traders for sponsoring the show. Promo code TheDiveDown gets you 25% cash back after 3 months of a Mana Trader subscription. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, amber is the color of your energy. Oh, something, something energy.